The July heat clung to me like a suffocating blanket as I sat on a cracked bench near the bus stop. The pavement shimmered in waves, and the air felt thick enough to choke on. 3 nights without a roof had left me hollow. My bag, the last remnant of my former life, sat at my feet, stuffed with a few clothes and the bare essentials. It was strange to think that just a year ago I was a nurse at a private clinic in New Haven, respected, with a small apartment of my own. Now I was simply Anna Whitaker, 30 years old, without a home, without a father, and without a future. I pulled a small mirror from my bag and studied the reflection that looked back. The same brown eyes, the same strong lines of my face, but dulled now by exhaustion and the bruising shadows under my eyes. I used to look confident in my nurse's uniform. I used to smile easily. Now, even my smile felt foreign, like it belonged to someone I no longer was. My thoughts dragged me backward to the day everything started unraveling. The clinic had blamed me for a patient's death, a mistake that wasn't mine. They needed a scapegoat, and I was convenient. Court battles drained my savings. My reputation was destroyed. Then came the cruelest blow, my father falling ill. I sold our apartment to pay for his treatments, clinging to hope, but the treatments failed. Watching him waste away, watching the strength leave the man who had raised me alone, it broke something deep inside me. And when he finally passed, the silence left behind was unbearable. Yet he hadn't left me empty-handed. In his final days, he'd written a letter, not to me, but to someone I had only heard about in fragments of stories, his school friend, Richard Thompson. They had grown up together, but life had pulled them apart. My father was always too proud to ask for help, but as death closed in, he set that pride aside. He asked Richard to look after me, to not let me be lost in the world with nothing. That letter was folded carefully in my bag now, its paper softened by the countless times I'd held it, read it, and prayed it might change something. I glanced at my watch. 2 o'clock. The meeting was at 3. I still had an hour to gather myself, to pretend I was not broken, to appear as though I had something left to offer. I traced the address written on a scrap of paper. Greenwich, Connecticut. The heart of old wealth, a world I had only glimpsed in passing cars and glossy magazines. It felt impossible that someone like me would step into that world today. But what choice did I have? There was no going back to the clinic. No home to return to. No father waiting with a kind word and warm meal. Just this letter, this one fragile chance, this final tether to something beyond despair. I stood, adjusted the strap of my worn bag on my shoulder, and walked toward the bus that would carry me into the unknown. My father's last words echoed in my mind. Richard will remember me. He will understand. He will help you. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than grief and exhaustion. I felt the faint stirrings of hope, fragile but alive. Today could be the beginning of something different, or the final proof that I truly had nowhere left to turn. The bus ride from the city to Greenwich took nearly 40 minutes, yet it felt like I had crossed into another world. The noise and grit of the streets where I had been surviving seemed to dissolve the farther we went, replaced by manicured hedges, wide lanes shaded by maples, and the kinds of houses I had only ever seen in glossy magazines. By the time I stepped off at the last stop, the afternoon sun was gilding rows of stone walls and wrought iron gates. My shoes crunched against the gravel as I followed the directions scrawled on that slip of paper, each step pulling me deeper into a neighborhood where wealth was woven into every brick and leaf. When I reached the gates of the Thompson estate, I had to pause. The mansion stood behind tall hedges, 3 stories of pale stone and glass, its sweeping lawn dotted with sculptures and rose beds that looked too perfect to be real. A man in a navy uniform stood at the gatehouse, and my throat tightened. I clutched the strap of my worn bag as I approached, my voice barely steady when I told him, "My name is Anna Whitaker. I have a 3 o'clock appointment with Mr. Richard Thompson." The guard checked his tablet, nodded, and pressed a button. The gates swung open, soundlessly. Mr. Thompson is expecting you. Please go ahead. The path was paved in pale stone, leading toward the front doors framed by columns. Every step I took felt heavier, as though the disparity between who I was and where I stood grew sharper. Just days ago, I had been sleeping on a wooden bench in a bus terminal. Now I was walking into the world of a man who could decide my future with a word. A man in a dark suit greeted me at the door, ushering me through a hall lined with oil paintings and marble statues. My breath caught at the sheer expanse of it, the vaulted ceilings, the chandeliers, the polished parquet, floor gleaming under my worn shoes. Mr. Thompson is waiting in his study, the man said, his tone courteous but distant. I was shown into a room paneled with dark wood, where shelves of leather-bound books rose toward the ceiling. Behind a massive desk stood Richard Thompson himself. He was taller than I expected, his hair touched with gray, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "Miss Whittaker," he said, stepping forward to shake my hand. "I'm glad you came." I handed him the letter. His gaze lingered on the envelope as if it weighed more than paper and ink. He opened it, read silently, his expression controlled except for a slight tremor at his mouth. When he finally looked up, his voice carried a note of quiet respect. "Your father, he was a proud man. I wish I had known of his illness sooner." I told him everything then. The false accusation at the clinic, the lawsuit that ruined me, the endless hospital visits, the sale of our home, the nights I spent at his bedside begging for a miracle. My words were steady, though each memory cut like glass. He listened without interruption, his fingers pressed together under his chin. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Then he leaned forward. "You trained as a nurse. I may have a place for you here. My father, Charles, suffered a stroke 6 months ago. He's made progress, but he still needs constant care. Our caregiver recently left, and I need someone I can trust." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Work. A room? Stability? The tears that had been burning behind my eyes threatened to spill, but I forced myself to hold steady. "Are you offering me the job?" "Yes," Richard said simply. "Work here, live here, be compensated fairly. My father is difficult, but I believe you can handle him." I drew in a long breath, feeling something I hadn't in weeks. Hope. Fragile, trembling, but real. For the first time since I buried my father, I could imagine that maybe I wasn't at the end of my story. Maybe I had just stepped into its next chapter. I followed the house, attendant up the wide staircase, my steps muffled by the thick carpet. The corridor smelled faintly of polish and lavender, and sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting golden patterns on the walls. He paused outside a set of double doors and knocked gently. From within came a gruff voice, low but firm. "Come in." The study was large, airy, with tall windows that overlooked a garden. By the window sat an elderly man in a high-backed chair, a cane resting against the table beside him. His posture was stiff, his silver hair neatly combed back. But what struck me most were his eyes, sharp, calculating, as if measuring me before I'd even spoken a word. This was Charles Thompson. "So," he said, his voice touched with irony, "you're the one they've sent to keep me alive. Another jailer." I forced a smile and stepped forward. "My name is Anna Whittaker. I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Thompson." He studied me openly, his gaze traveling from my face down to my shoes. Then, unexpectedly, he gave a short laugh. "At least you're not dull to look at." The last one looked like she'd been pickled too long. From behind me, Richard's voice cut in, calm but firm. "Father enough. Anna is here because she's capable, not for your amusement." Charles only lifted a brow, unconcerned. "We'll see. I've run companies, Anna. I can tell when someone is weak. If you last more than a week, maybe I'll start to believe you're worth the trouble." His words should have stung, but instead I felt a strange steadiness take hold. "I don't intend to be weak," I said simply. For the first time, something like a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Good. We'll get along, then. That evening, I was invited to join them for dinner. The dining room was vast, with a table that could have seated 20, though only 4 places had been set. Richard sat at the head, Charles at his right, and beside him a woman I hadn't yet met. She was tall, with elegant silver hair coiled at her neck, her posture perfectly straight. A string of pearls glimmered at her throat. "This is my aunt, Margaret Thompson," Richard introduced. Margaret's voice carried the lilting resonance of someone who had once commanded an audience. "So, you are Anna. Richard tells me you've had a difficult time. Well, this house can be unforgiving, but I hope you'll find it a place of refuge." Her gaze was steady but not unkind. There was dignity in her every movement, the aura of a woman accustomed to fine theaters and concert halls. I realized with a start that she must be the same Margaret Thompson whose name I had seen once on a faded opera poster in a thrift shop. The meal was formal but not cold. Conversation flowed in measured tones, with Charles occasionally grumbling but never directing his sharpness at me again. Margaret asked about my nursing background, and I answered cautiously, leaving out the humiliation of the clinic. She nodded, as if she understood more than I said. Afterward, the housekeeper, a kindly woman named Mrs. Howard, led me to a guest room in the West Wing. When she opened the door, my throat tightened. The room was spacious, with a soft bed dressed in crisp linen, a window overlooking the garden, and even a small adjoining bath. To anyone else, it might have seemed ordinary. To me, after 3 nights on a station bench, it was salvation. As I sat on the edge of the bed, the exhaustion of the past weeks pressed down on me. But for the first time, I allowed myself to believe I might have a place again. Not just as a guest, but as a person who belonged. I was exploring the house one quiet afternoon, tracing my fingers along the shelves of Charles's study, when my eyes landed on a silver frame placed deliberately on his desk. It was a portrait of a young woman, her features delicate yet striking, her gaze carrying that mix of innocence and quiet defiance only the truly alive can hold. Beneath the frame was a nameplate polished to perfection, Catherine Thompson. My breath caught. The name echoed through me, colliding with memories I had long buried. Catherine, Katie, Richard's daughter, the girl whose tragic death in a car accident was spoken of in hushed tones, always with a veil of grief. Everyone said she had been taken too young, and Charles, her godfather, had never quite recovered from the loss. But it wasn't just the name that rattled me. It was the face. I leaned closer, my pulse hammering. I knew those eyes. I knew the curve of that jawline, the subtle tilt of her lips. They belonged not only to Catherine Thompson, but to a patient I had once tended to in the dim corridors of the state psychiatric hospital. Her name had been Yevdokia, though she barely answered when spoken to. Her hair was disheveled, her voice fractured, her eyes haunted. Yet beneath the layers of neglect and madness, I had recognized beauty, a spark of something broken but not extinguished. The resemblance was undeniable. I remember pausing, back then, thinking she looked out of place in that sterile, gray institution, like a bird with clipped wings shoved into a rusting cage. And now, staring at Catherine's portrait in Charles's home, my memory refused to dismiss the possibility. They were the same. They had to be. A cold chill swept through me, though the study was warm, the fire in the hearth still crackling from the morning. Could it be that Catherine hadn't died at all? That the accident was a lie? A story woven tightly enough to conceal a truth too dangerous to speak? But if she lived, why was she locked away in that asylum under another name? Who had placed her there, and what were they protecting or hiding? I sank into Charles's armchair, the weight of it pressing down on me. This wasn't idle curiosity. It was a thread of fate tugging at my hands, daring me to unravel it. I thought of the nights I had spent at the hospital, the cries of patients echoing through the halls, Yevdokia's hollow eyes meeting mine through the bars of her world. What if she had tried to tell me something then, in her fractured murmurs? What if I had missed the chance to save her? The photograph stared back at me, as if accusing me of complicity. I knew in that moment I could not let it go. Richard's daughter might still be alive, hidden in plain sight, silenced by those who should have protected her. The thought was unbearable, and yet it filled me with a grim determination. I closed the study door softly behind me, my heart pounding with a secret I dared not yet share. Somewhere out there, beyond the walls of this mansion, Catherine's shadow lingered, and I was going to follow it no matter where it led. I couldn't sleep that night. The photo of Catherine Thompson haunted me. The same soft jawline, the same eyes that once looked at me blankly from the window of the psychiatric ward. My pulse refused to steady. If Katie had really died in that car crash years ago, then who had I spoken to at the hospital? Who was Yevdokia? At dawn, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the glow of the screen casting pale shadows across the room. I searched everything I could about the accident. Headlines popped up. Tragic fire claims young woman's life. Richard Thompson's daughter dies in car blaze. I clicked through article after article, but the details gnawed at me. The body had been burned beyond recognition, the report said. They relied on dental records to confirm the identity. No witnesses, no photos, just fragments of charred metal and smoke. Something about it felt too convenient. I leaned back, rubbing my temples, and memory snapped like a whip. Yevdokia's trembling hands, the thin scar on her left wrist running from palm to forearm. At the time, I assumed it was from self-harm or an accident. But as I scrolled through old pictures of Catherine online, one image made my breath hitch. A candid photo from her college years. Her sleeve had slipped up, revealing the faint outline of a scar in the exact same place. My stomach clenched. This wasn't a coincidence. Driven by a cold urgency, I called the psychiatric hospital where I once worked. The receptionist recognized my name. I'd been on staff during Yevdokia's stay. I asked carefully at first about the patient records. Most files, she told me, were confidential. But when I pressed, saying it was for medical research, she hesitated, then lowered her voice. She's no longer here, the woman said. She was discharged a few months after you left. Discharged? By whom? My knuckles whitened around the phone. A guardian, she whispered. A man. Signed all the papers. Very well connected. His name was Alex Griffin. The air left my lungs in a sharp, unsteady exhale. Alex Griffin, the polished partner of Richard Thompson, the man who smiled like a politician and moved money like a magician. Of course it was him. He wasn't just Richard's associate, he was his shield, his fixer. I hung up and sat in silence, staring at the wall. 1,000 fragments locked together in my mind. Katie hadn't burned to death in that car. She had been hidden, renamed, buried alive in another kind of prison. And Alex Griffin had made it happen. The weight of it pressed into my chest. For years, people had pitted Richard's loss, admiring his strength in the face of tragedy. Meanwhile, the truth was rotting under their feet. My hands trembled as I whispered to myself, "She's alive, she has to be alive." The suspicion I carried had transformed into conviction. The shadows of the Thompson family stretched further than I imagined, and now I was entangled in them. One thing was certain, I couldn't walk away anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this family's history was far from what they let on. Every polite smile at dinner, every carefully measured word, it all seemed rehearsed, like a play that had been staged too many times. And the more I listened, the more I noticed the cracks. Charles avoided any mention of Catherine, Richard's late daughter, like the topic itself was cursed. But I had seen her face, those photographs in his study. And I had seen that same face before in a psychiatric hospital, staring at me with haunted eyes under a different name, Yevdokia. That alone was enough to keep me awake at night. But there were other threads, and I began tugging at them one by one. Richard's business partners, Alex Griffin and Anthony Myers, were names I kept hearing in passing. Their relationship with the family seemed cordial now, but the records told another story. I spent hours combing through public filings, old news clippings, and even forgotten corners of the company's archives. What emerged was a picture of greed and resentment. Griffin and Myers had once been Catherine's strongest allies, yet disputes over money, stock options, and missing funds had turned their alliance bitter. Still, bitterness alone didn't explain why a young woman had vanished. It wasn't until I ventured into Catherine's old room that the pieces began to shift into place. The room had been left almost untouched, a shrine of sorts, her favorite books neatly stacked, perfume bottles gathering dust, a faded scarf draped across the chair as if she had left in a hurry and would return any moment. I don't know what pulled me to check the desk, but when I slid open the drawer, my hand brushed against a worn leather notebook. Its pages were fragile, edges frayed, the ink smudged in places as if she had written in haste or with fear pressing down on her. I sat on the floor and began to read. Her handwriting was sharp, almost impatient, but her words struck like a blade. I know what they're doing. The contracts are forged. They think Father won't notice. But he trusts me more than anyone. I'll tell him soon. He deserves to know. I flipped to another page, my pulse racing. I confronted Alex today. He brushed me off, but I could see the panic in his eyes. Anthony pretends nothing's wrong, but I heard them whispering in the study. They'll ruin everything if I don't stop them. The entries grew more frantic as I turned the pages, the writing messier more hurried. And then, abruptly, they stopped. No conclusion, no explanation, just silence after her last words. If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. I sat frozen, the diary heavy in my hands. This wasn't speculation anymore, wasn't some shadowy suspicion. Catherine hadn't been blind, naive, or careless. She had known the truth, known about the fraud, the betrayal, the rot beneath her father's empire. She had tried to act, and then, right when she was about to expose everything, she disappeared. The air in that room seemed to grow colder. The silence pressed down like a weight. For the first time, I felt it clearly. This family wasn't haunted by grief. They were haunted by guilt. And I couldn't help but wonder, if Catherine had been silenced, how far would they go to silence me? That evening, the mansion no longer felt like the safe haven it once was. The echo of footsteps across the marble hall made me tense. 2 unfamiliar cars pulled up outside, their engines cutting through the quiet like a warning bell. I peeked from behind the heavy curtains and saw them, Alex Griffin and Anthony Myers. Their presence here was no accident. I froze, my breath caught in my chest. I had seen them before, in the sterile corridors of the psychiatric clinic, their sharp voices carrying threats cloaked as negotiations. The memory of that encounter still haunted me, and now here they were, stepping confidently into the Whitmore estate as though they owned it. I slipped deeper into the shadowed corner of the hall, praying they wouldn't catch a glimpse of me. If they recognized me, if they remembered my face from that day, I knew the questions would come. And questions from men like them were not meant to be answered. From a distance, I watched as Richard greeted them in the grand drawing room. His tone was steady, almost cordial, but I caught the stiffness in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed nervously against his glass. They weren't friends. They were sharks circling, waiting for weakness. I pressed my back against the wall, straining to hear. Their voices carried low and deliberate, every word dripping with implication. They spoke of deals left unfinished, numbers that didn't add up, and Catherine, always Catherine. Her name hung in the air like a ghost neither of them wanted to acknowledge, yet couldn't escape. Then Richard's voice, quieter, weighed down with something heavier than business. She told me once, before she disappeared, said she had stumbled on some unusual documents, contracts that didn't make sense. She wanted me to see them. The words slammed into me like a blow. My pulse quickened. That matched exactly what I had read in Catherine's journal just hours earlier. The frantic scrawls, her fear of being watched, the confession that she had discovered financial fraud buried deep in her father's company's partnerships. And now here was Richard, unknowingly confirming every word. I gripped the edge of the stairwell, my knuckles white. The pieces were aligning in a way that chilled me. Catherine had been on the brink of exposing them. She had intended to confront her father, to bring the truth to light. But before she could, she vanished. Griffin leaned forward, his voice sharp but controlled. Richard, the past is best left buried. She was impulsive. Don't let old stories cloud the future we're building here. Myers said nothing, but the way his eyes narrowed told me enough. There was knowledge there, knowledge and guilt hidden behind a polished mask. I remained silent in the dark, heart hammering. I couldn't let them know I was listening. I couldn't let them know I understood. But the truth was clear. Whatever happened to Catherine was no accident. These men, these partners, were tied to her disappearance. And now, whether they realized it or not, I was tied to it too. The mansion's silence felt suffocating once they left, the air heavy with secrets. But I knew one thing with certainty. Catherine hadn't been paranoid. She had been right. And the danger she feared was closer than ever. I knew I couldn't do this alone. The names Griffin and Myers weren't just whispers in Katie's journal anymore. They had walked through the doors of the Whitaker estate themselves. If they were bold enough to show up here, then I had no doubt their claws were sunk deep into whatever darkness Katie had stumbled across. And if I was going to fight them, I needed an ally. That's when Marina came to mind. She and I had worked together years ago, back at the city hospital. Marina wasn't just a nurse with quick hands. She was sharp, resourceful, and had a memory like a steel trap. If anyone could help me find the missing pieces, it was her. I dialed her number with trembling fingers, praying she'd even remember me after all this time. Anna. Her voice was surprised but warm. It's been forever. How are you? I didn't waste time with small talk. Marina, I need your help. And it has to stay between us. I took a deep breath before continuing. Do you remember a patient named Yevdokia? Admitted maybe 6 months ago? There should be a file. I need access to it. There was a pause on the other end. I could picture her, brows furrowed, turning the name over in her head. Finally, she said, I do remember her. Quiet woman, terminal case, right? Why do you need her records? Because I think they're connected to Katie's death. I whispered, my throat tight. I can't explain everything over the phone. Just can you look? Can you find it for me? Marina didn't answer right away, and I thought I'd asked too much. Then she said firmly, I'll see what I can do. But Anna, if I get caught, I could lose my license. You know that. I know, I said softly. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death. A long exhale came through the line, and then, all right, I'll dig into the archives. I'll call you when I have something. But Anna, be careful. If this ties back to Griffin and Myers, you're playing with fire. Her words lingered long after I hung up. She was right. I was already in too deep, but pulling out wasn't an option anymore. That night, as the wind howled around the estate and the walls seemed to creak with secrets, I began sketching out a plan. It wasn't enough just to know that Griffin and Myers were involved. I had to expose them. If Katie had died trying to reveal the truth, then someone had to finish what she started. Step 1. Wait for Marina's call. If Yevdokia's medical records showed irregularities, falsified signatures, or unexplained treatments, it would be my first thread of evidence. Step 2. Track down Katie's trail. Somewhere out there, hidden beneath the lies, was proof that she hadn't simply vanished into the grave they claimed she was in. Step 3. Prepare myself for the storm. Because going after Griffin and Myers wasn't just about paperwork or whispers in journals. These men didn't operate in half measures. They were dangerous, and now I was standing in their shadow. I closed Katie's journal and pressed my palm against the worn leather cover. Her words had led me this far. Now it was my turn to act. The pieces were moving, and I had just chosen my side. And though my chest was tight with fear, a spark of resolve burned brighter than ever. Whatever lay ahead, I wasn't going back down. I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls around me were shrinking. Griffin and Myers were showing up at the house more often, strutting through the halls as if they owned them. They never said much to me directly, but the way their eyes lingered, cold, watchful, sent a chill down my spine every time. Their presence wasn't casual. It was deliberate, a silent reminder that I was stepping into territory where I didn't belong. One evening, Charles closed the study door behind him and leaned heavily against the desk. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "There's something you need to know about Katie," he said, his gaze fixed on the fire. My heart skipped. She argued with Griffin the week before the crash. It wasn't a small fight. She accused him of pushing her into a deal she didn't want. She threatened to walk away from the contract entirely. I felt my breath catch, and then the accident happened. He nodded slowly, his expression grim. Griffin claimed it was a misunderstanding, but Katie wouldn't have driven on that road, not in the middle of the night. She hated that stretch. Too narrow, too many blind curves. She avoided it unless she had no choice. The implication hit me like a blow. I had been dancing around the idea, but hearing Charles say it out loud made it real. Katie's accident might not have been an accident at all. After that conversation, I started noticing things I had brushed off before. A car idling at the end of the driveway longer than it should. Footsteps echoing on the porch when no one came to the door. The faint sense that eyes were on me even when I was alone in the kitchen, the blinds half drawn. At night, I lay awake listening to every creak of the old house, every shift of wind against the shutters. My rational mind told me I was being paranoid, but instinct whispered otherwise. Paranoia didn't explain the shadow I caught in the reflection of the living room window. It didn't explain the way Griffin's smile lingered too long, sharp at the edges when our eyes met. Marina had promised to get me the files. I clung to that hope like a lifeline. But hope came with risk. If Griffin and Myers discovered what I was doing, I wouldn't just be putting myself in danger. I'd be dragging Charles into it too. One afternoon, while walking through the garden, I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. I turned, but no one was there. My pulse hammered in my ears. Somewhere deep inside, I knew I wasn't just imagining it. Someone was watching. And for the first time since this all began, the fear was no longer distant. It was here, in the air I breathed, tightening around me like a noose. The more I read, the more I realized Catherine had left breadcrumbs, small, careful notes that now painted a much darker picture. The diary pages were fragile under my fingertips, the ink faint but still sharp enough to pierce through decades of silence. She had written about meetings with Griffin and Myers, about contracts that were supposed to benefit the family but instead bled the estate dry. The entries mirrored everything Charles had confessed to me, down to the very day Catherine had argued with Griffin before the accident. The alignment between their stories was too precise to be coincidence. One passage made my stomach twist. If I push harder, they will make me disappear. I know what they are capable of. I stared at the line until the words blurred. She had known. Catherine hadn't been naive. She had been cornered, isolated, and silenced. I closed the diary and pressed it against my chest, fighting the shiver crawling up my spine. My instincts screamed, louder than ever. I wasn't just digging into the past anymore. I was stepping onto the same path Catherine had walked, and I could feel the walls closing in. Every glance over my shoulder, every flicker of a car parked too long on the street, every creak outside my window felt like a warning. And yet I couldn't stop. I started organizing the evidence, pages copied, photographs cataloged, Charles's testimony written down. Each detail built a scaffolding of truth, but I knew scaffolding could collapse if I wasn't careful. The more I pieced together, the clearer it became. Griffin and Myers had orchestrated not just financial ruin, but lives broken to keep their grip intact. Catherine had stood against them, and it had cost her everything. I whispered to myself, I won't let it end the same way. Still, the sense of time running out pressed on me. Nights felt shorter. My heartbeat never slowed. Even the simplest tasks, checking the mail, walking down the driveway, became exercises in paranoia. I caught shadows moving where no one should be. Once, I swore I heard footsteps behind me, only to turn and find empty air. But I trusted my intuition, and it told me the storm was almost here. I locked the diary away, but the words clung to me like smoke. The truth was no longer just about Catherine or the Thompson estate. It was about survival. I had uncovered enough to shake the foundation of Griffin and Myers, and they would know it. Sitting at the desk late one night, I wrote one final line in my notebook. There's no turning back. I didn't know what the next day would bring, only that the collision was inevitable. The evidence, the danger, the legacy, it was all converging. Somewhere out there, in the dark, the same forces that had silenced Catherine were waiting for me. And yet, instead of fear, a strange calm settled in. The pieces were aligning, and destiny was moving forward. I felt it in my bones. The truth was about to erupt, and when it did, the fate of the Thompson family and my own life would be forever altered.
Doctor, are you telling me my husband tried to falsify our baby's DNA test? Olivia Carter's voice trembled as she locked eyes with Dr. Vanessa Reynolds. The sterile white walls of the hospital office seemed to close in around her, the fluorescent lights casting an unforgiving glow over the documents laid out on the desk. Her fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair, knuckles whitening as her breath grew shallow. Dr. Reynolds exhaled slowly, her expression unreadable. Olivia. I've known you for years. I was there through every injection, every failed round of IVF, every tear you shed in this very hospital. I need you to listen to me carefully. She tapped her manicured nails against the paper in front of her, the crisp rustling of the document filling the thick silence. The test results were tampered with. Someone accessed the lab system, altered the data, and tried to make it look like the child you just gave birth to wasn't yours. The words slammed into Olivia like a physical blow. Her vision blurred, a wave of nausea rising in her throat. No. That's impossible. She clutched her baby boy closer to her chest, his tiny form warm against her. He stirred slightly, his little fingers curling instinctively around the fabric of her blouse. This child, this precious life she had fought so hard to bring into the world, how could anyone, let alone Ethan, try to erase him? Dr. Reynolds' voice was calm, but there was a cold fury beneath it. Olivia, someone went to great lengths to do this. And based on the evidence we've gathered, that someone was your husband. The room spun. Olivia sucked in a sharp breath, struggling to process what she had just heard. Ethan? The same man who had held her hand through every painful procedure, who had whispered reassurances into her ear on nights she thought she would never become a mother. The man who had painted murals in their nursery, carefully selecting pastel colors to suit their unborn child? No. This has to be a mistake. She tried to convince herself, but the look in Dr. Reynolds' eyes told her otherwise. The doctor leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. I need you to stay calm. I know this is overwhelming, but we are dealing with something serious here. This isn't just a matter of trust, Olivia. This is fraud. A crime. And if what we suspect is true, your husband didn't just want to cast doubt, he wanted to destroy you. The weight of those words settled heavily over Olivia. How did this happen? Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Dr. Reynolds hesitated before speaking. Let's start from the beginning. And just like that, Olivia's mind was pulled back to the moment she thought her life was perfect, the moment when she still believed in the man who had vowed to love her forever. Charleston, South Carolina. A city of charm, history, and whispered secrets behind grand antebellum homes. For Olivia Carter, it was the place where she had built a life she thought was perfect, a life that, looking back now, was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. It had all seemed so blissful just a few months ago. She could still remember that Sunday morning in late March, when the sunlight streamed through the towering stained glass windows of St. Michael's Church. The air carried the scent of freshly bloomed magnolias as she walked through the courtyard, her emerald green maternity dress hugging her 8 months pregnant belly. "Olivia. You look radiant." A warm voice called out. She turned to see Mrs. Henderson, one of the church elders, approaching with a smile. "Not long now," the older woman beamed. "How are the baby preparations coming along?" Olivia smiled, resting a gentle hand on her belly. "Almost ready. Just a few last-minute touches in the nursery." Beside her, Ethan Carter stood tall, dressed in a tailored navy suit. His hand rested protectively on the small of her back as he chuckled, exuding the effortless charm that had once drawn her to him. "She's being modest. I think we've single-handedly funded every baby store in Charleston at this point." A round of polite laughter followed, and Olivia let herself bask in the warmth of the moment. For 7 years, she had prayed for this child. 7 years of doctor's appointments, injections, disappointments, and heartbreak. And now, finally, she was on the cusp of everything she had ever wanted. As the congregation settled into the pews, the pastor's voice rang through the historic church. "Let us bow our heads in prayer, for the blessing of new life." Olivia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of Ethan's hand as he intertwined his fingers with hers. She had never felt more at peace. After the service, they dined at Charleston Grill, a tradition they had upheld for years. Ethan ordered the filet mignon, while Olivia opted for the chef's seafood special, teasing him about his predictable choices. Their conversation drifted to the upcoming birth, hospital bags, last-minute nursery adjustments, baby names. "I trust you completely," Ethan said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "You're going to be an incredible mother." His words made her eyes sting. She had no reason to doubt him then. The rest of the day had been picture-perfect. A stroll down King Street, where Ethan had spent 20 minutes debating over which stuffed animal would be their child's first. He had finally settled on a white rabbit, pressing it into her hands with a grin. "This one. It'll be his first friend." That night, Olivia sat in their bedroom, flipping through the pages of an old scrapbook. Each page held pieces of their journey, sonograms, hospital wristbands, photos of her holding up positive pregnancy tests with tear-streaked cheeks. Ethan had been there through it all. Hadn't he? She closed the album, pressing her palm against her belly. Please, let this happiness last. If only she had known what was coming. The night air in Charleston carried the faint scent of salt from the nearby harbor, a gentle breeze rustling the curtains of the open window. Olivia lay in bed, one hand resting on her belly, the rhythmic movement of her baby bringing her a quiet sense of comfort. Ethan lay beside her, scrolling through his phone, the dim glow illuminating his sharp features. She turned her head slightly, watching him. There had been something different about him lately, subtle, almost imperceptible shifts. He had been working later than usual. Coming home exhausted, distracted. Some nights, he would step out onto the balcony for long phone calls, speaking in hushed tones. When she had asked, he had simply kissed her forehead and murmured, "Just work, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." And she had believed him. But that night, as she drifted into sleep, a strange thought crept into her mind. Why do I feel like something is slipping through my fingers? April 3rd, the night everything changed. It was still dark when Olivia woke to a sharp, sudden pain radiating from her lower abdomen. She gasped, gripping the sheets as another wave of pain hit her. A quick glance at the clock, 3:15 a.m. "Ethan," she whispered, nudging him urgently. "Ethan, wake up." He groaned, blinking groggily before registering the distress in her face. His drowsiness vanished in an instant. "Liv, what is it?" I think it's time." Within minutes, Ethan was fully dressed, grabbing the hospital bag they had packed days ago. His movements were smooth, efficient, as if he had rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times. The drive to Charleston Memorial Hospital was eerily quiet. The city, usually buzzing with tourists and nightlife, lay still under the moon's glow. Ethan's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched. "How far apart are they?" he asked, eyes flicking to her in the passenger seat. 5 minutes, Olivia breathed, inhaling through the pain. It's happening fast. You're doing great, he reassured her, though his voice lacked warmth. She wanted to believe him. As they pulled up to the hospital entrance, nurses rushed to her side, helping her into a wheelchair. Dr. Vanessa Reynolds was already waiting for them, a familiar presence in a moment of overwhelming intensity. You've done well, Olivia, she said, checking her vitals. Let's get you settled. It won't be long now. Through the haze of contractions, Olivia registered the details around her. The soft lighting of the private suite. The scent of antiseptic mingling with fresh linens. The rhythmic beeping of monitors tracking both her and the baby's vitals. Ethan stood by the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the Charleston skyline. She barely had time to process the unease creeping up her spine before another contraction hit, tearing through her. Focus, Olivia. You're about to meet your son. The hours blurred together, an exhausting cycle of pain and breathing, encouragement and determination. Margaret, her mother, arrived at dawn, placing a bundle of prayer cards from the church into Olivia's trembling hands. Everyone's praying for you, sweetheart, Margaret whispered, squeezing her daughter's hand. Olivia could only nod, her body too tired for words. By mid-morning, it was time. Ethan held her hand, tightly, almost painfully, as Dr. Reynolds gave the final command. One more push, Olivia. You're almost there. With a final cry of effort, the pressure released, and then a baby's wail filled the room. Tears streamed down Olivia's cheeks as her son was placed on her chest, his tiny body warm against her skin. She could feel his heartbeat, fast and steady, as she whispered, "My baby, my beautiful baby." The moment was perfect. Sacred. Until Ethan shattered it. I need a DNA test. Right now. Silence. The nurses froze. Margaret let out a sharp gasp. Dr. Reynolds narrowed her eyes, her lips pressing into a thin line. Olivia, still holding her newborn, barely registered the words at first. Then, as if in slow motion, she turned her head toward Ethan. He was staring at the baby. But not with love. Not with awe. With cold, calculating suspicion. A chill spread through Olivia's veins. What did you just say?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan met her gaze, unflinching. "I want to confirm that this child is mine." The world around Olivia crumbled. The room turned deathly silent. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic beeping of the monitor and the faint cries of the newborn nestled against Olivia's chest. The warmth she had felt just moments ago, the overwhelming joy of holding her son for the first time, was now swallowed by a cold, creeping horror. She blinked, certain she had misheard. "What did you just say?" Her voice was barely more than a whisper. Ethan didn't flinch. His expression was unreadable, his eyes locked onto the tiny infant in her arms. "I want a DNA test. I need to confirm that this child is mine." The words landed like a slap. Olivia's breath caught in her throat, her fingers instinctively tightening around her baby. Margaret, standing beside the bed, let out a sharp, incredulous gasp. "Ethan, have you lost your damn mind?" Her voice trembled with rage. "You're questioning your own child? After everything Olivia has been through?" Ethan didn't acknowledge her. He didn't move. He just stood there, eerily calm, waiting. Dr. Reynolds stepped forward, her professional demeanor barely concealing the ice in her voice. "Mr. Carter, I understand that emotions run high after childbirth, but this is neither the time nor the place for this discussion." Olivia turned back to Ethan, searching his face for something, anything, that could explain this. A misunderstanding. A cruel joke. Some kind of stress-induced paranoia. But there was nothing. The man who had once kissed away her tears after every failed pregnancy test, who had painted the nursery walls by hand, who had promised her they would finally be a family, was now looking at her as if she were a stranger. Her lips parted, but no words came. Ethan exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate. I'm not asking, he said quietly. I'm demanding it. The betrayal sank into Olivia's bones, heavy and suffocating. She could feel her mother's hand gripping her shoulder, steadying her, but it did little to stop the tremors racking through her body. The baby, sensing the tension, whimpered softly, his tiny face scrunching up in discomfort. Olivia instinctively rocked him, her protective instincts roaring to life. Her voice shook, but her words were steady. She swallowed hard, her throat burning. You're accusing me of something, aren't you? Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. The realization hit her like ice water. He wasn't just asking for a test. He wasn't just doubting. He had already made up his mind. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest. This wasn't some impulsive request. This had been planned. Her mind raced, grasping for anything that could explain why, after 7 years of heartbreak, after watching her body break down under the strain of fertility treatments, after finally getting the miracle they had prayed for, he would look at their son and see a question mark instead of a blessing. Unless, he wanted to see something else. Her stomach twisted. Dr. Reynolds, still holding the lab chart in her hands, exhaled sharply. Fine. If that's what you want, we'll run the test. But Olivia and the baby need rest. You'll get your results when they're ready, not a second before. For the first time, Ethan's jaw tightened, his fingers flexing at his sides. A flicker of something, annoyance? Frustration, passed through his expression, but he quickly masked it. Of course, he said smoothly, slipping his hands into his pockets. I'll wait. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room. As soon as the door clicked shut, Olivia's composure shattered. A sob clawed its way up her throat, but she bit it back, holding her baby closer as if she could shield him from whatever storm was brewing outside these hospital walls. Margaret knelt beside her, cupping her face with gentle hands. Sweetheart, listen to me, she whispered fiercely. I don't know what's going on, but I will get to the bottom of this. Dr. Reynolds placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder. We'll take care of the test. But Olivia, something about this isn't right. Olivia knew that. She just didn't know how wrong it truly was. The sterile white walls of the hospital room felt colder now, the warmth that had once filled the space replaced by a suffocating sense of unease. Olivia clutched her newborn son to her chest, pressing her lips against his soft forehead. He had only been in this world for a few hours, and already, he was at the center of something sinister. Margaret stood by the window, arms crossed tightly, her face twisted with fury. That man has lost his damn mind, she muttered under her breath. A DNA test? After everything you've been through? Olivia swallowed hard, her throat raw. She could still hear Ethan's voice in her head, cold and unwavering. I need to confirm that this child is mine. None of it made sense. Dr. Reynolds, ever composed, flipped through the paperwork in her hands. I've already sent the sample to the lab, she said. We'll have results in a few days. A few days. The words sank like lead in Olivia's stomach. She had expected these first moments of motherhood to be filled with happiness, with exhausted laughter, with Ethan's arms wrapped around her as they marveled at the tiny life they had created together. Instead, she was waiting for a test to confirm what should have been unquestionable. The baby stirred against her, his tiny fingers curling against her hospital gown. Olivia forced herself to take a slow breath. And you're sure, she said softly, there's no mistake? The test will show that he's. Dr. Reynolds' gaze softened. Olivia, I was there through every step of this pregnancy. There is no doubt in my mind. And yet, Ethan had planted that doubt anyway. Margaret turned from the window, her expression dark. You need to prepare yourself, she said quietly. For what? Margaret hesitated, then met her daughter's gaze. For the possibility that Ethan already knows what the test will say. A chill ran down Olivia's spine. What are you saying? She whispered. I'm saying that this isn't about him wanting to know the truth, Margaret said. This is about him controlling the truth. The word settled heavily between them. Dr. Reynolds hesitated before speaking. Olivia, if there's anything you haven't told me about Ethan, now is the time. Olivia shook her head, her pulse racing. No. He was perfect. He was always perfect. Supportive, loving. He wanted this baby just as much as I did. Dr. Reynolds didn't look convinced. Margaret let out a slow breath. Then tell me, Liv. When did he stop acting like it? The question sent a shiver through her. She hadn't thought about it before, not really. But now, as she sat in that hospital bed, the weight of her mother's words pressing down on her, flashes of the past few months began piecing themselves together. The late nights at work. The sudden distractions. The way he had pulled away just enough for her to notice but not enough for her to question. And then, the way he had looked at their son. Not with awe. Not with love. With calculation. Olivia's grip tightened around her baby. Something was very, very wrong. The hospital room felt like a prison. Olivia barely noticed the soft hum of monitors or the occasional footsteps in the hallway. Her thoughts were trapped in a cycle of disbelief, anger, and something far worse, fear. Ethan knew. The way he had stood there, so unnervingly calm, so prepared, told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment doubt. This wasn't shock. This was premeditated. And the terrifying part? She had no idea why. Margaret sat beside her, arms crossed, eyes sharp with suspicion. You need to be careful, Olivia. Olivia looked down at her baby, gently rocking him as he slept. Careful of what? Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Of what he's planning. A fresh wave of nausea washed over her. What he's planning. Ethan had always been a calculated man, meticulous in everything he did. His business deals, his public image, his place in Charleston's elite. Nothing was left to chance. So why would he suddenly demand a DNA test unless he already had a plan in place? A plan that required making her look like the villain. Olivia's blood ran cold. Dr. Reynolds, who had remained quiet, exhaled slowly. I don't want to alarm you, but I did some digging. Margaret straightened in her seat. Digging? Dr. Reynolds placed a tablet on the bedside table and pulled up a document. A lab report. This is a copy of the original DNA test before it was processed, she explained. The one I personally verified before it went through the hospital system. Olivia's pulse quickened. And? Dr. Reynolds swiped her finger across the screen, revealing another set of data. This is what was sent back to me after the test was completed. Margaret leaned in, eyes narrowing. Even without medical expertise, it was obvious, the two results didn't match. What the hell? Margaret whispered. Olivia's grip on her son tightened. You're saying, someone changed the results? Dr. Reynolds nodded. Yes. And it wasn't a mistake. The weight of the moment settled over them, thick and suffocating. Margaret was the first to speak. Then that means someone tampered with the test before Ethan ever saw it, Dr. Reynolds finished. A deafening silence followed. Olivia felt her breath hitch. But why? Dr. Reynolds hesitated, then met her gaze. I think Ethan already knew the baby was his. Margaret let out a bitter laugh. That son of a, he knew, and he still put Olivia through this? Dr. Reynolds' expression darkened. He didn't just put her through this. He made sure there would be evidence that could be used against her. Olivia's heart pounded. Against me? Margaret inhaled sharply. Oh, God. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward, lowering her voice. I don't think Ethan wanted to prove the baby isn't his. I think he wanted to frame you for cheating. The world tilted. Olivia felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Her fingers dug into the hospital blanket, knuckles white. No. No, this wasn't happening. This wasn't just doubt. This wasn't paranoia. This was an attack. Ethan had set her up. He had planned this. He had walked into that delivery room, knowing exactly what he was doing, with the full intention of destroying her. Her voice came out hoarse. Why would he do this to me? Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for Olivia's. Because if the DNA test said the baby wasn't his, you'd be accused of infidelity. Olivia's stomach churned. He'd have the perfect reason to divorce you, Dr. Reynolds added. And with infidelity on your record? He'd take everything. The house, the money, full custody of the baby. Olivia felt like she was going to be sick. Margaret's face twisted with rage. That bastard, he was never planning to stay, was he? Dr. Reynolds' jaw tightened. No. He was planning an exit strategy. Olivia's mind reeled. 7 years. 7 years of love, of struggle, of heartbreak and healing. Had any of it been real? Had Ethan ever truly wanted this family? Or had he always planned to walk away? Margaret's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. We have to fight back. Dr. Reynolds nodded. And we start by exposing the truth. A new resolve settled over Olivia. Her fear didn't vanish, but it shifted. If Ethan thought she would just sit back and let him destroy her, he had made a fatal mistake. He wanted war? She would give him hell. The weight of the revelation pressed down on Olivia's chest like a boulder. Ethan had orchestrated all of this. He had walked into that delivery room with a plan, not a doubt. And if Dr. Reynolds hadn't caught the tampered results, he would have succeeded. Her fingers curled into fists. He wanted her to look like the villain. He wanted to take everything from her. Margaret's voice was sharp with fury. So what do we do now? Dr. Reynolds didn't hesitate. First, we report this to hospital security. The system logs will show who accessed the test results. If we can prove that the data was altered, we'll have something solid. Olivia swallowed hard, her grip tightening around her baby. And Ethan? Margaret's expression darkened. We hit him before he hits you. Dr. Reynolds nodded. If Ethan thought he could control this, we need to take that control away from him. Olivia, you need to be careful. The moment he realizes the truth isn't on his side, he'll find another way to twist it. A shiver ran through Olivia's spine. She had spent years trusting this man, believing in him. She had pictured him in every milestone of their son's life, his first steps, his first words, school drop-offs, family vacations. Now, the thought of Ethan holding their child made her sick. Margaret straightened. I'll call our lawyer. Olivia's stomach churned. But I don't have any evidence yet. Margaret's eyes were steely. We will. Dr. Reynolds tapped her tablet, pulling up the system logs. I'll start here. If someone accessed these results, there will be a digital footprint. Margaret turned back to Olivia, her voice firm. And you need to act like you don't know anything. If Ethan suspects you're onto him, he'll cover his tracks. Olivia exhaled shakily. Pretend like I don't know? Pretend like I'm still the trusting wife? The thought made her want to scream, but she forced herself to nod. Okay. She looked down at her baby, sleeping peacefully in her arms. He had no idea what was happening around him, no idea that his father had already tried to erase him. She leaned down and pressed a kiss to his soft cheek. I won't let him take you from me. Margaret squeezed her shoulder. You're stronger than him, Olivia. He underestimates you. Maybe he did. And maybe that would be his greatest mistake. 48 hours later. Olivia sat on the edge of the hospital bed, trying to steady her nerves as Dr. Reynolds stepped into the room, a folder clutched in her hands. She knew before the doctor even spoke. The results are in. Margaret, sitting beside her, exhaled sharply. And? Dr. Reynolds' expression was grim. The baby is biologically Ethan's. There was never a question about that. A bitter laugh bubbled in Olivia's throat. Of course there wasn't. Because this was never about doubt. This was about control. Dr. Reynolds continued, flipping open the folder. But that's not the most important part. She turned the folder around, showing a screen capture of the hospital's system logs. Here's where the test results were first processed. And here, she tapped lower on the page, is where someone accessed the system in the middle of the night. Olivia leaned forward, her breath catching. Who? Dr. Reynolds' gaze sharpened. A male figure was seen entering the lab around 11:30 p.m., the night after the test was submitted. The security footage isn't the clearest, but we ran the logs. The system was accessed from an external source. Margaret tensed. An external source? Dr. Reynolds nodded. The login came from a device registered to Ethan Carter's company. The room fell into silence. Olivia felt her pulse pounding in her ears. So, he didn't just want the results changed. He personally made sure it happened. Dr. Reynolds exhaled. We also have testimony from one of our lab technicians, Ryan Delgado. He reported that someone approached him 2 days before the test was processed, offering him $500,000 in cash to ensure a certain outcome. Margaret's jaw clenched. And let me guess, he refused? Dr. Reynolds nodded. And after that, he started receiving anonymous threats. Olivia gritted her teeth. Ethan wouldn't have stopped at threats. If Ryan had taken the money, he would have had leverage over him. But because he didn't. Margaret finished for her. Ethan had to break into the system himself. A cold, burning rage settled in Olivia's chest. This wasn't just betrayal. This was criminal. Dr. Reynolds met her gaze. Olivia, this isn't just a civil matter anymore. This is fraud, data manipulation, and attempted coercion. Margaret leaned forward. So what's our next move? Dr. Reynolds closed the folder. We call the police. Olivia's breath hitched. This was it. The moment everything would come crashing down for Ethan. A part of her, the part that had once loved him, wanted to hesitate. Wanted to believe there was another explanation, another way. But then she looked down at her son, innocent, vulnerable, and already targeted by his own father. No. She met Dr. Reynolds' gaze and nodded. Do it. Dr. Reynolds picked up the phone. The battle had begun. Ethan Carter sat in the cold, sterile interrogation room of Charleston Police Department, his polished demeanor still intact despite the circumstances. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across his face as he casually adjusted the cuffs of his tailored shirt. He didn't look worried. If anything, he looked annoyed. Detective Hannah Pierce watched him from across the stainless steel table, her fingers drumming lightly against the case file in front of her. She had interrogated dozens of high-profile men like him, corporate elites who thought their wealth made them untouchable. But Ethan Carter was different. He wasn't just arrogant. He was calculating. She leaned forward. Let's go over this again. Where were you between 11:30 p.m. and 12 a.m. the night after your son was born? Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose, feigning boredom. At home. Sleeping. Hannah raised an eyebrow and slowly slid a photograph across the table. It was a security camera still from Charleston Memorial Hospital, grainy, but unmistakable. A tall man in a dark suit, his posture stiff, his face partially obscured. She tilted her head. That's funny, because this looks a lot like you. For the first time, Ethan's expression shifted, just slightly, but enough for Hannah to catch it. He recovered quickly, offering a smooth, indifferent shrug. Coincidence. Lots of men wear suits. Hannah smiled, a slow, knowing smile. Sure. But not every man has access to the hospital's internal system. She pulled out another document, a digital log of unauthorized access. This, right here, traces back to a device registered to your company's server. Care to explain? Ethan's jaw tensed. He opened his mouth, but before he could formulate another lie, the door behind Hannah swung open. Another officer stepped inside, and behind him was Lauren Mitchell. Ethan stiffened. His lips barely parted as he muttered, "What the hell are you doing here?" Lauren didn't look at him. She was dressed sharply, but her usual confidence had been replaced with something else, resignation. She crossed her arms and turned to Hannah. "I have something to say." Ethan's entire body went rigid. Hannah gestured to the chair beside him. "Go ahead, Ms. Mitchell." Lauren sat down, finally meeting Ethan's eyes. For the first time since walking in, she spoke directly to him. "I told them everything, Ethan." Silence. The color drained from his face. "You, what?" Lauren's voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "I told them how you instructed me to contact Ryan Delgado. How you offered $500,000 to make sure the DNA test results were falsified. How you planned to make Olivia look like a cheater so you wouldn't have to pay her a dime when you divorced her." Ethan's fingers twitched, his control slipping. "You're lying." Lauren let out a hollow laugh. "Am I? Because last time I checked, I have all the emails. The ones where you told me exactly what to say to Ryan. The ones where you promised me a fresh start once all of this was over." She shook her head. "I should have known better. But I won't go down for you, Ethan." Hannah leaned back in her chair, her smirk growing. Well. That's quite the confession." Ethan turned to Lauren, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You don't know what you've just done." Lauren met his gaze, unflinching. "I saved myself." Ethan exhaled sharply, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The evidence was overwhelming, the betrayal complete. Hannah closed the case file with a soft thud. "Ethan Carter, you are under arrest for fraud, falsification of medical records, bribery, and obstruction of justice." Two officers moved in, grabbing his arms and forcing him to his feet. He didn't fight, but his knuckles turned white as he clenched his fists. "You don't know who you're messing with," he hissed at Hannah. She smirked. "No, Carter. You don't." As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Ethan finally understood. He had lost. The cold steel of the handcuffs pressed against Ethan's wrists as the officers led him out of the interrogation room. His once perfect composure had cracked, the weight of reality sinking in. The hallway outside buzzed with activity, officers moving about, phones ringing, papers shuffling, but to Ethan, it all blurred into the background. His mind was spinning, calculating, looking for a way out. There had to be a way out. As they passed the observation window, he caught a glimpse of himself in the reflection. The powerful, untouchable businessman he had always been? Gone. In his place stood a man whose carefully laid plans had just collapsed. He was shoved into a holding room, the officer stepping away as Detective Hannah Pierce followed in after them. She leaned casually against the metal table, arms crossed, watching him like a predator that had already won. "You know," she said, her voice almost amused, "I've dealt with a lot of men like you, Carter. Smart. Wealthy. Think they're always a step ahead." She tilted her head. "But you made one crucial mistake." Ethan forced himself to meet her eyes. "And what's that?" Hannah smirked. "You underestimated your wife." The words landed heavier than he expected. For years, Olivia had been the perfect partner, loyal, trusting, believing in him without question. She had never doubted him, never once suspected what he was capable of. That had been his greatest advantage. And now, it was the very thing that had destroyed him. A knock on the door interrupted the moment. An officer stepped inside, handing Hannah a document. She skimmed it, then let out a satisfied sigh. "Well," she said, tossing the paper onto the table, "looks like you've got more problems than you thought." Ethan narrowed his eyes but said nothing. "That's a warrant," she continued. "Your bank records. Offshore accounts. The $5 million you tried to move out of the country?" "Yeah, that didn't go unnoticed." She gave him a mockingly sympathetic look. Divorce courts don't tend to like it when a husband tries to hide assets before serving his wife with false adultery claims. Ethan's jaw clenched. And let's not forget the bribery charges. She flipped the document over, tapping a highlighted section. Ryan Delgado's statement, along with the security footage, proves you attempted to falsify medical records. That's a federal offense. He inhaled slowly through his nose, his mind scrambling. This couldn't be happening. He had planned everything perfectly. He had made sure there were no loose ends. Except for Lauren. His gaze flickered toward the door. She was out there somewhere, free, walking away from this unscathed. He had trusted her. He had given her everything she asked for. And in the end, she had betrayed him faster than Olivia ever could have. One last thing, Hannah said, straightening. Since you were so worried about proving paternity. She slid another document toward him. Here's the final DNA test. Turns out, you are the father. Ethan didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. For the first time, the reality of what he had done hit him completely. He hadn't just tried to frame Olivia. He had tried to erase his own child. Hannah studied him for a moment, then shrugged. I gotta say, Carter, for a man who wanted to control everything, you sure lost control of this. With that, she knocked on the door, signaling the officers. Ethan barely registered the click of the cuffs tightening before he was pulled to his feet. As they led him down the hallway, the world outside moved on without him. His name would be all over the news by morning. His career? Ruined. His money? Seized. His life? Destroyed. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Carter had no power. 2 years later. The warm spring air drifted through Olivia Carter's backyard, carrying the scent of magnolia blossoms. The sun cast golden light over the neatly kept garden, where a 2-year-old boy giggled as he ran through the grass, his tiny feet kicking up soft tufts of earth. Matthew, slow down, sweetheart, Olivia called from the veranda, laughing as her son ignored her and dashed toward the flower beds. He was happy. Carefree. Unburdened by the past. Olivia leaned back in her chair, sipping her tea as she watched him. The past 2 years had been a journey, healing, rebuilding, rediscovering herself. It hadn't been easy. There had been court battles, media scandals, endless questions. But in the end, she had won. Ethan was serving a 10-year sentence. His company had cut all ties with him, his name had been dragged through every newspaper in Charleston, and he had nothing left. Lauren had disappeared, rumors said she had moved to Miami, starting over somewhere far away from the mess she had helped create. And Olivia? She was finally free. Margaret stepped onto the veranda, a knowing smile on her lips. He's got your stubbornness, you know. Olivia smirked. God help me. Matthew stumbled, then picked himself up with a determined little huff. Olivia's heart swelled. She had been afraid once. Afraid that Ethan had taken too much from her, that she wouldn't be able to rebuild. But sitting here, watching her son, she knew the truth. She hadn't lost anything. Ethan had. She set down her cup and stood, stepping into the sunlight as Matthew ran toward her, his arms outstretched. She lifted him easily, spinning him around as his laughter filled the air. For the first time in years, she felt light. She pressed a kiss to her son's forehead, then whispered. You tried to destroy me, Ethan. But in the end, you only destroyed yourself. The wind rustled through the trees, the scent of spring thick in the air. And with that, Olivia Carter walked forward, never looking back.